I want us to look over at 1 Peter chapter 3. Verse 1, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. I want to tell you something. This makes me laugh. You think God isn't all wise? God, look what He says. He says, if any of them are disobedient to the word, He said, wives, they may be won without a word. How do women seek to change their husbands? With their tongue, with their words, isn't it? I've even seen women, husband, I'm telling you, you are going to be the leader of this home. Now get up and lead. And I'm going to tell you how. I mean, just fighting with their husbands constantly. You are not going to change your husband with your tongue. You're going to change him with your behavior. Let me give you an example. I come home from work, and it's been a bad day. And I'm thinking about only one thing. Me. All right? And I deserve it. I have suffered all day working in the mission. Things have gone bad. I've had to fight the devil, hell, and everything else. And I'm coming home, and things need to be right. And I come home, and they're not right. Now, usually my house is clean, and usually there is food ready and everything else. But I come home this particular day, and it looks like Godzilla came through my house. And I say, honey, what's the deal? I mean, I'm out there fighting the devil all day, and I'm supposed to come home to an orderly house. And she spins around and looks at me with a fire in her eyes that would make a grown man run back to his mom. And she starts, what do you mean coming in here? You don't know what I've got to deal with. And you out there all day hey, doing this. And yeah, you went to lunch. Yeah, and you did this. But I'm stuck here and I'm homeschooling. And the moment she does that, it's the fight is on. Now, I know none of you ever deal with anything like this. But the fight is on. And guess what? Both parties are justified in their own mind. They are totally justified. And no one is ashamed for their ignorant, foolish, ungodly actions. But now, let's replay it. And I come home and I'm still all about me. King me. And I come home, the house is messed up, and there's no food, and Rowan is crying, and all these things are going on. And I say, look, I mean, I'm out there all day, preaching the gospel, doing things. At least I could come home and have a little peace. I'm making this up because I never do things like this. And my wife turns around and she goes, Paul, I am so sorry. Some sisters, one sister has, I've been on the phone almost all day trying to figure out a problem with a sister in the church, and Rowan is sick, and I've just had to let things go. And I'm sorry, just give me time and I'll get things in order. When she does that, this is what I do. I go outside, go into my workshop, find oak is usually the preferable wood that you want. But hickory also is a good wood to use. And you take it with both hands like this, and then you go wham, 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 wham. And then you crawl back into the house and you ask for forgiveness. Look what she's done. She couldn't beat me with her words, but she beat me with her behavior. She heaped burning hot coals on my head with her godliness. Do you see that? Now, men, it's the same way. Man, if we could ever get a brother to come up here. He teaches on marriage in Norm Wakefield. And he was teaching me one day. And he said, Paul, when I'm preaching and God's really moved or something's happened and I drive home, he said, I'm preparing myself because I know when I open that door, I am hoping my wife will realize I've just come from a tremendous week of battle and that she'll meet me at the door and just be a blessing. He said, Paul, I know it's usually not going to happen. I know some things are going to be going on. Now you can say it's the devil, that the devil's got my whole house upset and my wife's going to open the door and she's going to be immediately telling me problems. She's going to ignore my needs and everything else. And he said, but it's not the devil so much as it is God. And what God is doing is He's allowing the devil to work to stir up my house so that when my wife opens that door and she does not receive me with pleasantness and she doesn't appreciate the battles I've been through, God is giving me at that point an opportunity to be like Jesus. To love like Jesus. You see that? So see, it goes both ways. Now let me give you an illustration. If you go to Europe, one of the things that you always got to see are castles. I mean, they're just unbelievable. There's something unusual about castles. The front door of a castle is like really big on the first floor. I mean, it's huge. I mean, 25 guys walking abreast can go through that door. It's a big door. What's amazing, you go up to the second floor and the stairway is about this big. And the door at the top is like this tall, like this big. You're like, man, if that wasn't an architectural oversight, why did they do that? Well, here's the way. Here's the reason. Let's say that there's a bunch of people in the castle and they're in there locked up because there's an army, a gigantic army outside the castle. Well, that gigantic army, it storms that door, the first door. And 25 men leaning against that door and they push it in and here comes the whole army floods into that first floor. And let's say there's only 10 people in that castle. But the army's 300 men. And they've just busted through the door. All the people in the castle, the 10 people, they run up that narrow stairway. Now here's what you need to understand. That stairwell is so narrow that it just takes one man with a lance at the top of that thing to hold off an army of 300 men. Because all 300 of them can't get up there. Only one at a time. I just described your marriage. Women, your husband is sitting in his castle and he's just having a good old time. He's sitting in his lazy boy chair. He's watching football or a hunting program. And you have had enough. All right? So you storm the castle door. And what does he do? He does what every man ought to do. He runs. He runs straight up those stairs. I like what one man said one time. There's these 3 men and they're all talking about my wife, she submits to me and my wife submits to me. And this other guy goes, you guys are a bunch of wimps. When my wife talks to me, she gets down on her hands and knees. They said, really? Yeah, she gets down on her hands and knees and she looks under the bed where I'm hiding and she says, are you going to come out and fight like a man or stay there all day? But here's the thing, wife, your husband sees that double-edged sword coming out of your mouth, and he runs up, and he's got his lance, and you coming up that stairwell. And you're coming up that stairwell fighting with him, that tongue of yours is moving like a weed eater. And the whole time you're giving him the rights. You're just telling him the way it ought to be. The whole time you're doing that, you're also praying. God, why don't you help me with this man? God, why don't you help me with this man? God, why don't you do what you need to do? Why don't you change this man? God, I can't understand. And every time you say, God, why don't you help me with this man? God's going to get out of the way. And you're like, oh, I'm not getting out of the way. And you just keep fighting. God, why don't you get up here and help? God goes, there's room for only one. Get out of the way. And you won't get out of the way. Because you'd rather just wag that big dangerous tongue of yours than you would get out of the way. I thought about writing a book. I'm still thinking about writing a book to wives on how to act in such a way so that God will kill your husband. I'm just afraid it'll be a bestseller and we'll have a lot of men dying. But you remember what God says in Romans? Well, in Romans 12, give place to the wrath of God. Get out of the way. It says, don't deal with your enemies. Don't fight fire with fire. If someone does evil to you, don't do evil back. Just get out of the way. And what God is telling a woman is this. Continue in your godliness. Continue in your quiet spirit. Seek to honor Him as much as you can. And call out to me. And I will be your help in the day of trouble. God changes people.